is brought to you by Generate Solutions, your go-to AI experts specializing in empowering commercial real estate companies and environmental consulting firms. As AI is quickly transforming industries and enhancing efficiency, it is important you don't let your business fall behind. At Generate Solutions, we streamline workflows and automate tasks by creating custom AI agents tailored specifically to your business needs. Interested in taking your operations to the next level with AI? Email mfiorante@generatesolutions.com or find us directly on LinkedIn by clicking the link in the bio. On to our episode.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of A Conversation with John Conenna. Today is one that really for me is the honor of honors. I'm going to say this very loud because it has a lot to do with me growing up and following the legend. And now today I have an opportunity that I thought I would never have in my life to interview the son of the great Mr. Goalie, Glenn Hall. His son, Pat Hall, has been gracious to come on my show and to talk about his father. And of course, this great movie that we were both a part of in Windsor, Ontario on October 26th. It was the premiere of the movie Mr. Goalie. What I have in front of me is the puck from the film, which was a souvenir. It was Mr. Goalie. And of course, on the back, it was the world premiere, which says it on here on October 26th. And my guest, Pat Hall, that I'm going to bring in, we were a part of this. And of course, just so many tie-ins to this. And the director of the film, Ryan McInerney, was a player of mine back in the early 2000s when he was a goaltender himself. And he asked me the ultimate question one day, and he was about 14 years old. He said, "Mr. Conenna, who is the greatest goalie you ever saw?" And I immediately, without thinking, said, "Glenn Hall." Pat, thank you for coming on, and what's going on with you, sir?
It's a pleasure. It was a pleasure to meet you in Windsor, John. And when you asked me if I'd participate in this, it was easy for me because you're an easy guy to talk to, and it's a topic that I enjoy talking about.
I got to tell you, I remember the day when I told Ryan that I had these Goalie World magazines in my house, and he would hang out with my son Vincent. They were on a travel hockey team together, and Ryan was an up-and-coming goaltender, great goaltender, and he worked at his craft like he worked on this film. And we talked about your dad and how far back his career went in the 50s and, of course, the 60s. And the years with St. Louis in the late, up until, of course, 1971 when he retired. I just want our audience to know, because sometimes people say, well, where's Glenn Hall? Well, Glenn Hall is alive and well. But, of course, we're interviewing Pat today, and we're going to read through the memories and through Pat's eyes about that. Pat, what do you, I'll start it this way. Remember your first memories of Dan? Where were they? Were they in Chicago?
Yeah, and I'm pretty fortunate because there was 4 kids in the family, and I was the oldest. And when I talked to my brother Lindsay, who's the youngest, I feel bad for him because it was such a blessing, a unique opportunity, anything you want to call it or look at it, that we were in. To be kids of somebody who played in the NHL. And so my memories, just because I was older, Lindsay, well, all my siblings were born in Chicago. And but Dad retired in 71. I think Lindsay was born in 65. So like Lindsay was 6 years old. So my memories start in Chicago. My memories start at the old stadium. Skating on the ice on Saturday mornings, or when it was Christmas holidays. That was a great feeling because you get to go 3 or 4 days in a row. And I didn't at first, when I was 7 or 8, mom and dad didn't let me go to all the games because they were usually on weeknights in Chicago. There wasn't many weekend games, and they were weeknights. And so once I hit about 10 or 11, they let me go to all the games, and that was such great memories. And where I was going to go though is going into practice. We'd enter through gate 3.5, and as soon as you got in, there was a distinct smell to the old stadium. Not an unpleasant smell, just whether it was a mix of beer and hot dogs and popcorn and whatever it was, there was this smell. I wish somebody could have bottled it because I'd pay $100 for a bottle of it right now.
You know what? Thank you for bringing that up, because my first game was in 67, 68 season. I had seen him before, but in that building, my dad took me, and yes, it reminded me of like the other day I went to go look at a new car, and I opened the door, and the guy goes, "What are you doing?" I go, "I just want that smell of the new car smell, because we can't bottle that either." But yeah, there was a distinct smell when you walked in that old building on West Madison, and that had to be something for you. Do you remember that? Is there a first season that you remember watching him in Chicago that you get, was it, mid 60s? What was your, because we're cut from the same era, I think.
Right. Well, again, it's just, I'm thinking like the places that we lived, if I have it right, like when I was about 6 years old, I think we were in an area of Westchester. Can remember, players coming and going. I don't remember a heck of a lot about the season. The only humorous thing I can remember about that season, I was about 6 or 7, and Dad came home one day and he told me he was going golfing with Lloyd Pettit, the very well.
The announcer.
Yeah, and that impressed me more than if than all the Blackhawks coming through the front door, because I thought, oh wow, my dad knows Lloyd Pettit. So there was those kinds of memories, and then I think the second year, about 63, we moved to North Riverside, and there's again practice memories, different things, but where it really started to kind of hit home for me, and I got to feel like I was part of it, is when I was probably 8 or 9. We were living in Elmhurst. I played hockey at the Elmhurst Y, the outdoor rink there. And again, like I had mentioned earlier, that's kind of when mom and dad let me start going to all the games. And it was probably the 65, 66 season that memory starts, 66, 67. Huge memories. We won first place. We got rid of Muldoon's curse.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. And I mentioned in the film that you mentioned, and we'll, if you want to, we'll talk about it. But somehow or another, I had, as a kid, like as a 10-year-old kid, I used the term, and it's probably accurate. I weaseled my way in because, and I don't know if you remember, John, but in the Chicago stadium, they had the Blackhawk bench. And then just right extended there was about 8 or 10 seats, just the portable type seats. And then there was some glass and the visitors bench. Well, somehow I had managed to get myself into that section. And so for that was, there were so many memories there because I was right on the ice. And I mean, towards the end of the year, they presented the Prince of Wales.
Wales.
And I mean, I was a kid, but I don't think I was alone in thinking that we had a pretty good lock on the Stanley Cup that year.
Oh, for sure.
Such a good season. And, so just, it was exciting. And again, I remember the Blackhawk players were great. As a kid, it's funny, all the players are pretty good, but you could tell the players who didn't really care for kids, and you could tell the players who loved the kids.
That didn't mind you. They're being there, right? Exactly. And I got to tell you, you being the son of Glenn, of course, you saw practices with these legendary figures of Makita, Bobby Hall, Dennis Hall, taking these enormous slap shots on your father, correct?
I did, but boy, oh boy, was I ever, did I have a false sense of security as a kid? Because my dad, I thought, was pretty bulletproof. And so you're right, these guys, and I
Oh,
marveled because at 10 years old, I was just trying to raise the puck. And I'd watch Bobby or Stan, and they'd be at center ice and they'd flick their wrist and it would hit the crossbar and go 100 miles into the air.
did
I
he?
thought, how are you going to do that? And so, like you say, when they're shooting on dad, I just thought he knows what to do. And so it was later, that I looked back and I thought, I guess where I could draw it in is I had kids. My son played goal. I have grandkids playing hockey now. I don't like watching them because I'm afraid. I just fear for a check from behind. I fear for things,
Yes.
and so to bring your point in is I don't know how I made it through those days, but there was just a false sense of security that a kid would have that nothing's going to happen to dad.
Right.
But it was crazy.
And I could imagine what your father went through as the athlete. I mean, this man probably, okay, he played in these 502 consecutive games, which will never be broken. This has been brought up so many times, but to play 502 without the mask, and no one knows because I was a goaltender. These chest protectors that Dad wore, Glenn Hall, his arm pads were like felt. I mean, the chest protector. So you can imagine the bruises and the bumps this man had. He probably played with broken ribs, especially if you're playing against Bobby Hall in practice, let alone everybody else outside of the game. I gotta say this about Dad and why I made the statement, not because I was a Chicago fan. I was a student of this position, and why I said Dad was the greatest goalie is because he was really the inventor of this butterfly style. He
Right.
really was the inventor. It did get changed over the years in the sense of like Esposito, Roger Crozier, everybody else, but he was able to adapt to the speed of the game because when you go from 1952 in Detroit to 1968 in St. Louis, this game's changed. We
Yes.
got everybody shooting the puck now like Bobby Hall. But thing about your father, the acrobatics and the way he could catch a puck, for me, was different than a Johnny Bauer, a Terry Sawchuk, a Gump Worsley. They were good. They were good, but they weren't Glenn Hall. How do you feel about this analogy I make about Dad because you saw Dad firsthand?
Well, and it's so true. And again, being a kid, I listened to other people like yourself, and there's one of the Hall of Fame goalies that are in the film is Jerry Cheevers,
Yes.
and just a great person. And so we were also happy that he agreed to be in it because he has an interesting perspective on things. And but one of the things that he said that maybe I didn't realize at the time you would have playing the position more, but he said that Glenn developed the butterfly. He said the butterfly is a great position, is a great way to play the goal, but he said it can also get you in a lot of trouble. And he said the thing that Glenn did is he was up and down faster than anybody. And yeah, just boom. And that's something I didn't really appreciate. Jerry pointed it out is that, and he is right, because we've seen many goalies in the last 25 years. And like you have said, it's changed so much, but there's goalies who get in nothing but big trouble from the butterfly.
Right.
And yeah, and it's just, you have to be a certain level of agility and athleticism, I think, to be able to pull it off. And the guys who have been successful had all that as well.
You know, I've watched YouTubes of Dad when he was in Detroit where he started. And again, I mean, this was really innovative what he was doing because those goalies that we saw in the 50s were like the rod goalies in the game that we played when we were kids.
Yeah.
They really were, the shots were low, but he was able to be so aggressive at his position. Something that you told me in Windsor when I sat next to you in that film, and let me tell you something, it was an honor to sit in that theater with you next to you. You talk about goosebumps on my arms like robin eggs. They were there. I never told you. I don't. I just. It was an honor to sit next to you, just to sit next to you, because we were both in tears watching that
Yeah.
movie. But I have to tell you something you said to me after the movie that stayed with me. You had told me about a goaltender. They're both passed, two brothers, Dave and Ken Dryden. And you said, I think it was 1963-64, Dryden, David, had come up to be Glenn's backup, your father's backup. And you said to me, yeah, it's a shame we lost Dave. And now this 5 weeks ago, we lost Ken Dryden, his brother. But you said something to me, and this is what it solidified it for me to dad have this title of Mr. Goalie. The great Ken Dryden of the 70s would come down to see his brother Dave Dryden, and he'd sit there with Dave and talk to my dad for hours about goaltending. And of course, we all know what Ken Dryden did in the 70s, but even Dryden, I have an early, which I would love to send you. I don't know if you've ever seen it. He said, when I was a little boy, we'd play ball hockey and they would take shots at me in the garage, and you dreamed of being Glenn Hall. So this whole thing with the film and his career and how he did things, I mean, I don't know if you ever heard that story, but when you told me that Dryden would come down to see his brother by train from Canada to see Dave, even just to watch him on the bench, because I don't think Dave played much when your dad was playing as the backup. What a story. I mean, what kind of an influence did you see that dad had this influence on other goaltenders or other players or youngsters?
In more, it came to light more in later years. We've been so honored as a family, that and we're honored on behalf of dad, that we kind of just thought in 1971 that he retired and that would be it. But the hockey world has really kept dad on as a topic, and so when you talk about the Drydens and both of them, just such great guys and great people, and dad and Dave, there was a real connection there, because dad in his own way is very cerebral, and I think that's the way he approached the position, and the Dryden brothers have that reputation as well. And but Ken, would want to know, I guess, in later life, had an opportunity to talk to dad. We just didn't realize Ken was going to be have the career that he had. And one of the things that kind of really warmed my heart is when the Humboldt tragedy happened, and a year or two later, Ken Dryden wanted to go to Humboldt and offer his support. I talked to people from Humboldt, and the first thing he said when he landed in Humboldt is, "Take me to where Glenn Hall lived." And I thought that was nice. Like he wanted to drive past dad's house, and that was if he was going to be in Humboldt. So, and again, like you mentioned, I think he might have even mentioned it in the book, the game about playing ball hockey, and so it's just you just kind of want to give those guys a hug and say thank you for the kind and gracious comments. And I mean, they're well deserved, but they are so nice to hear this many years later.
Did he happen to come in? Was he able to see dad when he came in, or no?
No, because dad was dad, we're in the Alberta area,
Oh,
different.
okay, right.
So we'd be 5-6 hours away. So we just kind of exchanged some greetings through mutual friends in Humboldt.
Wow,
And
what the honor of honors. I have to go back to, of course, where you were born here in Chicago. Those years, I mean, because we don't know, I would just, hear about his Detroit years, of course, and we probably both weren't born, before when he came here in 57. What did the Chicago years mean to Glenn Hall, Pat? What was Chicago to him? Bringing us a first Stanley Cup since the 30s in 1961 with those guys in front of him, Makita Hall, Mackey, Elmer Vasco, Pierre Palat. Did he talk about it a lot after his retirement?
Throughout, he would say that the best thing that happened to him was getting traded to Chicago. You know, you can talk about whatever went on in Detroit with Jack Adams, and you know, there was friction there because of Ted Lindsay and
The
Dad's.
players union and all that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and Dad's always the first guy to point out. He said, you know, now people think of Ted as the players union, but don't ever forget what a great hockey player he was, and
Oh,
nothing but respect for him. And so, you know, when he got traded, I think that you know, it was as a punishment. I think Jack Adams, because Ted Lindsay and Dad, you know, I was going to show, and like Dad said, and other people had said, it was kind of like going to Siberia, because the Blackhawks in those days hadn't made the playoffs for years, and they were struggling. And so he, like Dad said, it was a great place to go because I knew that we couldn't go any further south. He said we were in the bottom, and like he said that Ted wasn't there when they did finally win the cup in '61. He had already retired and
he
gone back.
retired at the end of the 59-60 season. You are correct.
Okay, yeah. And the reason I remember that is Dad saying that he was there. You know, he had an influence on the mental approach of that hockey team that won the cup in '61. So, you know, they had the right players, everything was coming in. And I mean, you know, developed a few years after the cup. You know, they're almost like a glamour team with Bobby Hull and Stan Mikita and Pierre Pilote, the marquee players. And then you can't forget the Bill Hayes and,
Okay.
Litzenberger, Ed Litzenberger.
Eddie Litzenberger, right.
Yeah. So, you know, Dad made lifelong friends. He did his work. What's the word I'm looking for? You know, his body of work. The major part is in Chicago. It was successful. It was a great place to play. We actually, just a small correction. I was born when he was still in Detroit, and then my three brothers and sisters were all Chicago. So again, the family, you know, we just have a connection. My mom just loved Chicago, loved the people, and you know, he said it was the best thing that happened, and he was sincere that it was, because it let him become Glenn Hall, and he did it with a lot of other young guys.
You know, in '61 they win, and there's a game that, of course, I don't think there's any video of it. And if anybody's got the video, it would be the great Paul Pascal from the Toronto, who was with us. Paul's got everything. Paul might have our street hockey games from Elmhurst. I don't know. But Paul is tremendous. But I got to tell you, just the other day, two guys from Berwyn who wrote a book, and I'm going to send it to you. They wrote a book called The Twins, The Bygone Journey of a Lifetime. They lived in Berwyn, and they met Dad. They met Chico Mackey when you guys were living in Berwyn, and Pierre Pilote when they were all living in Berwyn. And he was just here the other day. His name is Karl and Tony Ruzicka. They were a Ukrainian family in Berwyn, and they wrote this book, which I'm going to send to you. And they say that in this game against Montreal, because they had to beat Montreal to move on to play Detroit for the Stanley Cup in '61, it was an overtime game, and they said, John, we listened to it on a transistor radio. I think the announcer was Johnny Gosling before Lloyd Bennett. And they said that Hall was Dryden of the day in '61. Before Dryden, he said, and Murray Belfour scored a goal in overtime to win that game 2-1. And that was it. He goes, no one was stopping them after that. And they beat Detroit in 6 games. Just incredible. To tell you, they should have won it in '62, '63, and '64, but a team called the Toronto Maple Leafs got hot in the '60s, or got lucky, so all those Toronto people could come after me. But his years in Chicago, he would bring them up from time to time, wouldn't he?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And again, partly because of the hockey, partly because of the long-term friendships. I mean, there was always, all through these years, the Makitas. He'd run across Bobby. Bill Hay was an Alberta boy as well as Dad. So we were able to keep really close contact with we made lifelong as friends, and I mean, I felt like I was a lifelong friend of theirs as well. Just a
Sure.
side story is my mom's dad, my grandfather, Grandpa Carl, as we call him, he'd always come down to Chicago around sometime later in January, and then he'd stay for the duration as long as the playoffs went. So, and all the players adopted him as their father-in-law, and I mean just the tentacles that our family from everywhere had with the Chicago fan base, the Chicago people, the Chicago team. It was special. It still is. Unfortunately, so many people have passed. That things change, and we're getting to be this age. Can't believe how old I am when we're talking about.
I wish we could go back at least to 1981, maybe.
Yes. I feel like I'm still back then, but I'm not.
Pat, there's a beautiful picture I have. I think it's in one of the books. There's a beautiful picture of Dad stood up to Stan Mikita's wedding with Mike Ditka, Bobby Hull, and I forget the other, Mike Ditka, of course, being the coach of the Chicago Bears here, and of course, a great player, Stan, and I forget who else. I don't know if it was Al Arbor who played with Dad in St. Louis. I don't remember who the other groomsman was.
You know what? I can't tell you the names. They were two of Stan's non-hockey friends.
Okay. I think you are correct, because I can't remember them being on the platform of the athletes. Right.
And I think one of them, like, it might have been a Madigan, or I just can't remember the name.
I can't remember. But that picture, just wow. You see that picture, and there he is, your dad and everything else. I want to go to 1967 because I was young at the time, and it was really one of the first seasons I watched them when they did, after winning that Prince of Wales and then losing to Toronto in that playoff round. He had gotten hurt on a Jimmy Pappin slat shot. And then, of course, the announcement came here in Chicago that he was going to retire. And I remember this like yesterday, turning to my dad and saying, wow, the Hawks are going to need a goaltender because, you really, even though DeJordy was an up-and-coming goalie, again, nothing against Dennis DeJordy, he was not Glenn Hall. So now, we rebuilding here. Why we were all shocked that Glenn Hall wanted to retire. But when September came, and I think I still have an old Hockey Illustrated, it was a magazine, that St. Louis was sniffing around the barn. We were wondering, okay, what's going on here? And then, can I just say, those 4 years in St. Louis, this man, I would have voted him for Athlete of the Year, because that first year in St. Louis, he wins the Conn Smythe Award in a losing cause to Montreal. The next year, he splits the duties with Plante. In 69-70, after Plante got hurt in game 1 against Boston, they didn't go to Ernie Wakely. They went to Glenn Hall to finish that series, and he was phenomenal, even though Mr. Orr was flying through the air in game 4. That game, if everybody watches that game in its entirety, which I know we can't, for 3 periods, St. Louis had a lead, and it was because of Glenn Hall. And then I know it was part-time in 70-71, but I felt those 4 years in St. Louis, when he was maybe 37 to 41 years old in that span, what did you think of Dad in St. Louis, and what was Dad's recollection of the St. Louis Blues?
Well, it was, I think, one of the reasons he did want to retire for a couple of years. I think he just was burning out a bit.
Sure.
And so he truly wanted to retire. And I can see where the Blackhawks would have thought it would be risky to protect him and then have him not come. So, but then that's kind of a two-edged sword, because I think two things in my mind, and from talking to Dad, is that something unique is that the owner of the Blues, the general manager of the Blues, and Scotty Bowman, who was the coach, Lynn Patrick and Scotty were sharing it, and Sid Solomon, they came out to Stony Plain, Alberta to see that. So that's a statement in itself. And then they started talking about money. And, I think Dad's last year in Chicago, he was at $36,000 a year, I think. And they started talking money. And, Dad's got a funny story about it, but it ended up that they paid him they offered him $47,500 to come play a year. And I think part of it was that when one team doesn't want you, which is a little bit harsh, but in his mind, as an athlete, I'd say, okay, the Blackhawks didn't want me. And the Blues really did. I think he probably thought he had something to prove, that he could still play the game. And so I think that's why he took the challenge, just to, as you mentioned, he came out as the six original, the original goalies for the six expansion
teams. 6 teams.
Yeah, and I mean, Sawchuk goes first to LA, and again, probably because of Toronto's Cup that year before, and then Bernie Perrant, young and got a full career ahead of him, goes to Philly. They picked second, and then the Blues picked third, and so he ends up in St. Louis, and they show a real desire for him, and then when he got there, Scotty Bowman was just a kind of a way ahead of his time on coaching.
Innovative, yeah.
Yeah, and then Dad says too, the way he used Dad, like that first year, Dad played a pretty full schedule with Seth Martin, but then when Plante came, what Scotty let them do is if Plante was playing, Ernie Wakely or one of the farm team goalies would be the backup on the bench, and Dad would just sit in the press box. And I think he found it so the stress was so down low because, like he said, if you were on the backup goalie, you still have to be ready to get called in. Well, if you're up in the press box, that's a pretty far stretch. So he, and then same thing when Dad played, Plante would be in the press box. So we had two older gentlemen at the end of their careers, and he was really using them well.
He won the trophy in 68, 69 as the two best goaltenders ever that was phenomenal. But you know what? Thank you for breaking it down that way, because that part I didn't know, that say like an Ernie Wakely would back up Dad when he was playing, and he would back up the Jacques Plante on that. And so Dad could, hey, have the tie, maybe have a nice Coca-Cola and a popcorn with your mom and watch this game and not worry if Plante was going to get plastered and Wakely would come in to relieve him. Right.
Right. And the whole game day household was fairly tense, in all the years. But in those days, when he knew he was going to be sitting in the press box, I wouldn't say he's necessarily whistling down the hallway, but you could feel that no real tension about what was coming that night. So it just like he probably got an extra couple of years out of it because Scotty was doing that.
Sure. And again, with Scotty Bowman, the legendary coach, of course, true to his word, because I wound up watching, as soon as I came back from Windsor, I wound up watching this Molson film clip of the 68, 69 when they split the duties. And sure enough, true to his word, he started Jacques in game 1, Glenn in game 2, Jacques in game 3, 4. I know they got swept, but again, those scores were close, and they were close because of Glenn Hall and Jacques Plante, but because, St. Louis didn't have the firepower of a Montreal team, for sure.
No, and if you just sorry to interject, but
no.
You go back to the first year, that year you mentioned when Dad won the Conn Smythe, 2 games against the mighty Montreal Canadiens. 2 games went into overtime, and the other 2 were 1-goal differences. So
right,
they kind of sold expansion to the world with that performance.
Sure, I mean. Every game, right, Pat, was a 1-goal game, right? Every game. And here's the thing. Can you imagine Lady Luck if a puck would have bounced in or something for St. Louis or something? this series, I mean, that would have been world, like you would have heard this from all the way to Antarctica if that would have been pulled up. But they made it a game, but again, I hate to put the emphasis on your father, but your father to have a caliber goaltender like that, their first 3-4 years was amazing. When 71 came around, did he make the announcement, or did he had to talk it over with you and the family and your mother and say, hey, I think this is it now for me?
It was a foregone conclusion, I think. It's just that it was kind of odd that, Dad did the first year, and then we thought that he probably wouldn't go back, but he signs with St. Louis for a second year. And we thought, well, this is really it. This second year is, Dad's extended it a couple of years. Well, I'll be darned. Like, I think what it was is he went back to St. Louis, flew back from Edmonton, and went back so that they could present the Vezina to Jacques Plante and Dad, and the reception that the fans gave him and the team and everything. It moved him, and so I'll be darned if we don't get a phone call. I'm back in Edmonton. We didn't go for this presentation, and the season had already started. I'll be darned if Dad doesn't sign a 2-year contract for years 3 and 4 in St. Louis. It just, he just fell off my chair.
Right.
And so, and he tells us in the film that Mr. Solomon, who was such a gentleman, he went to Dad and said, hey, Glenn, you're set up pretty good. You got the farm out in Stony Plain, and he said, you got the land and you got the equipment. He says, but you're still living in a tent. He said, you put in another year or 2 here and you got yourself a nice house. And Dad said, he's got a point. So somehow or another that affected his decision. He signed for the 2 years. So I think, and it was the first time in my life that I went to St. Louis or any city knowing we were coming back the next year for sure, because he had a 2-year contract.
2-year contract. Wow.
So that was really unique. But but we all just knew it. There wasn't a press conference like there are in today's NHL, where somebody will actually hold a press conference. It was just a foregone conclusion. I think we were staying out at the Solomon farm for those 2 years, and I think they had a team party out at the farm after, and it was goodbyes. They knew that it was coming to a close.
Well, just fantastic. And of course, I mean, to end it on the notes that he did with St. Louis, no one could have ever imagined him still playing at the level, let's say, of the 1950s and 60s. What an athlete he was. To kind of jump forward, I know he became a goaltending coach in Calgary, I think it was. Because I know Mike Vernon spoke about him highly, any goaltender that was, matter of fact, Vernon said, I didn't need Glenn Hall on the ice. I just needed him to talk to me. That's how this man had so many experiences. How does he, when you talk to him today or even 5 years ago, how does he look at the game and the position today, your father?
That's a good question, because he kind of let the game go. Like I think, he just, when we'd be at the house and watching a game, he'd be coming in and out. I don't know what it is. Maybe, they're an athlete who's played at that level for that many years in that league. But when I would talk to him, I realized that, hey, he must be watching games when I'm not around, because he still knows it and he's still with it. And one of his comments was, he said, the game, the players, he said, are stronger, are faster, where Bobby would shoot the puck at 100 miles an hour or whatever. Now, half the team does. And so he had nothing but respect. But he said, the only thing is the game's not better than when we played. So how come? And he found an irony there. He always was a little bit critical. He didn't like, I guess if you can say it, and might have to cut me out of your job, but he was always a little critical of reffing. He just, he'd watch reffing and he'd get frustrated. Yeah, I think he'd leave the room. He'd make a few statements, and his idea was, he said, they're running around, Jack the Ripper, they're running around cutting off heads, and then they'll call a penalty for dirty fingernails.
Yeah.
And he said, that's what he thought the game.
I'm in agreement with that. So if you do see him in the next couple of days, he's in agreement with you. I got to ask you a question that maybe there is no answer to, but during his time or during now or 20 years ago, did Dad have a couple of top favorite goalies who he said to you, wow, that kid's pretty good?
You know what? I mean, when you mention the top, I mean, he loved the guys that he played against, like Gump and Johnny Bauer were close to his heart. And later on, Jerry Cheevers, and though his real fraternity were Johnny and I'd say Gump, and then Seth Martin and Dave Dryden, those guys. But I think, like he would say, he could look at a Patrick Roy and know that he was a world class top level goalie. And he would look the same thing with Richard Brodeur, Martin Brodeur. Sorry, he said Martin Brodeur will hold all the records when he's done for two reasons. He's an excellent goalie playing on an excellent team, and he said he's gonna have it all, and he was right. So he watched those guys with admiration, and sure. And part of the goalie fraternity, like he would respect them all. But he was, the ones he would tell me were going to be good before they actually were. He was right.
Wow. Thank you for that perspective, because I always wanted to know what a Glenn Hall thought of another goalie being who he was. And thank you very much. I mean, it's a question I always wanted to ask him, directly.
The only other thing, sorry again, John, but I'll add to that, because it is that right now he's not, and I can't explain it on his behalf, so I won't, but I'll just say he's not of the seems to be the hockey opinions now is the bigger the goalie, the better. Like don't take a 5'10" goalie, take a 6'8" goalie. And Dad is still saying take the best goalie, because that size doesn't matter. And
exactly, without a doubt, I would have to agree as the amateur looking in, take the best goalie.
And I can't explain. He'd have to be here to explain, but he said that.
Oh no, I could read into what you're saying. Okay. Well, listen, I want to just switch gears here. Mm-hmm. About this great movie that we both saw, the world premiere of on October 26th in Windsor, Ontario, Mr. Goalie, which won the People's Choice Awards there in Windsor. Fantastic. We were both there to see it. I knew you were there for a couple nights with your family, with Tammy and Carly, your daughter, and got to meet Tammy, your sister. When the family was approached by this great young director who I love, Ryan McInerney, who made me a part of this, even in the credits there at the end, I went crazy. What goes through your mind when now they were going to make this documentary about Dad?
Well, a lot of things. It's been in the works, and I know you're aware of it, John, that Ryan started on this journey in 2017. I got a phone call from Ryan, and he didn't know me, and I didn't know him, and we didn't know if we would mesh or how, where we would go. But he expressed an interest to do a film on the life of Glenn Hall, and right out of the chute, that's very flattering. And I would have said, I'm all ears, Ryan. Tell me what you're thinking. And he would have said, well, I want to come to Stony Plain, and we want to do some interviews just and get this thing started, and that would be where we begin. So I said, okay, well, let me talk to Dad. So I talked to Dad and just explained what you and I had just gone through. A young fella named Ryan McInerney wants to do a film, Dad. I think it would be a blessing to have a Glenn Hall film, and Dad was all in. Yeah, he said, I'm good with that. So in January of 2017, Ryan comes out, and I'm surprised because I don't know anything about filmmaking, obviously. And he brought Chris Hill, his video slash photographer genius, and they came out, and I was surprised by the equipment. They talked about B-roll and different things that I knew nothing of, but they set up our basement, and when he was talking to Dad about the Detroit years, he would have all as much Detroit memorabilia around as he could. Then he'd switch to the Chicago years. We'd switch it all out. It didn't mean a lot to me. It made sense, but it didn't mean until I watched it on the film and the colors and the background on the film. And so, again, to get back on point is, what did we think? Well, we didn't know Ryan. We had a lot of trust in Ryan, and he had a lot of trust in us. And it kept moving. We all thought, I think Ryan included, that in a year or two it would wrap up and we'd have this finished product. In the end, you and I saw the finished product a couple of weeks ago, and and Ryan always apologizes to the family and thanks us for being so patient. And we go back and say, Ryan, you know what? Every month was worth the wait when we watch the product that he created.
Oh.
It's a beautiful film, and just so and one of the things did you have a chance to meet Patrick McMahon, John?
He did, and of course, being a part of the Ryan's crew in this thing, yes, fantastic work.
Yeah, he's very accomplished, and so getting him on board, and has Ryan put this team together?
Yes,
that slowly started to create, and Patrick right now is doing the narrating, and he did a lot of the writing. And it's I remember Patrick, bless his wife who's passed, and I know that was tough on Patrick a couple of years ago. But one of the things that sticks with me is he said, my wife was never a hockey gal or a hockey person, and he said, but she watched the film, and she said it impacted her. And so I thought that's for Ryan, is that people, it's a kind of to me it comes across more as a story about a life well lived than just somebody who's, if you're not a hockey fan, you can still enjoy the movie.
Oh, without a doubt. And the way he went about it chronologically and everything else, I mean, just fantastic work. I got to ask you, as the two adults you're talking, of course, nowadays in such a modern world that we have, when you first met Ryan McInerney, Pat Hall, and your family, Tammy, Carly, your wife, and whoever, did you guys think, okay, we like this young man's direction?
Yeah, without a doubt. There was nothing about him that rubbed you the wrong way. There was nothing about him that would make you suspicious. Just as soon as we met him in January, and we went to the Glen Hall Arena in Stony Plain, and we were in the basement for a lot with the filming set up. And as soon as we met him, you just knew that he, any kind of concerns, which there probably was some, any kind of concerns that you would have had, gone. And again, total trust. If Ryan says we need another year or something, then we need another year. And he's the boss.
And of course, we never knew that COVID was going to be in the way. I mean, he was always apologetic. I have tried for 4 years to get an interview with him, and he would say to me, Mr. Coach Conenna, because he always called me Coach Conenna, please, little patience. When this movie is over, I promise you will have interviews on top of interviews. And he truly, I want you to know it's after the fact, but what a choice in picking Ryan McInerney to do this, because he had a passion for your father after I told him like no other.
Well, and for you planting that seed, we appreciate it. And, really, Ryan found us, more than we found him. And I think it was kind of divine intervention. And there's some kind of, I felt an energy around this movie that came from a higher power. And Ryan and I both kind of chuckled about that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm going to leave you with this as something that I'll never forget. I want to say it was 1988, or maybe, I think it was 88. the night they retired Dad's jersey in the old stadium with the guy that I grew up watching, because now Glenn had left, Tony Esposito. It's a night I'll never forget. Um, when they had beautiful suits on with your mom and of course Tony with his wife, and they walked out on that red carpet at center ice, the two of them. And I just turned to my wife and I says, boy, if these two guys could have played together in Chicago, like a plant. And but anyway, I'll never forget that night. They donned those two jerseys, 35-1. And that night I made sure I went to the game, because you know why made sure? And I don't know if you have this one, and if you don't have them, I have three of them and I will send you one. But you know, this stays in my heart all the time. This is my Glenn Hall bobblehead. And I told my family, I'm going to get to the stadium at 4:30 because I am not going to miss this from Mr. Goalie. This is my Glenn Hall. I don't know if you have it. I don't know if they'll have one Saturday night. And if they do, you got to get me an extra one if they do Saturday night. But I have to tell you, Pat, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for today. And I hope we can do another one, but this was fantastic to talk about who we call Mr. Goalie, Glenn Hall, the best, the dad, in these, after hopefully, you can tell him about this interview, the best, the dad. I would have loved to have met him on the real live stage here, but understandable. And I want to thank the family and thank you today for your time. This was the honor of honors for me, like I opened it up.
Well, just been a pleasure for me, and wish you lots of future success, and appreciate your interest in Dad's career and Dad's movie. And it's people like you who you really sit back and say, we're so fortunate to have people still holding Dad that close and that dear in their heart. And we feel it, the family feels it. And we thank everybody, you and everybody else, for that.
You got it. We have visited today with Pat Hall, the son of the legendary Mr. Goalie, Glenn Hall, and of course, Glenn is a member watching the Hall of Fame awards last night, is a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame also in 1975 when he was inducted. And again, today we have visited with Pat, who's gave us some great insight on all the years that he played the film, and probably one of the greatest interviews I've had in a long time. Thank you, Pat, and best to your family, and good day, everyone.
Thank you.